Hi, I'm Jacob Gallucci, and right now I'd like to present the track list for Rock and Roll Roots Volumes 27 and 28. And I'll explain what Rock and Roll Roots is. There's a station in Chicago, a radio station, The Drive, WDRV, 97.1 FM, or 97.1 FM. There's a host, there's a DJ on this station. His name is Bob Stroud, and he's been there since the station's inception back in April of 2001, and every Sunday morning from 7 to 10, he hosts a show called Rock and Roll Roots. It's a show that plays a bunch of songs from the 60s and 70s with occasional songs from the 80s as well, and until 2010, every year he had an album called Rock and Roll Roots. He had 12 albums overall. Volumes 1 through 3 came out when he was at 94.7. Back when 94.7 was a classic rock station, it was known as CD 94.7, WXCD Chicago. At the time, the albums were known as Classic Rock Roots, and those albums came out between 1998 through 2000. There wasn't a Rock and Roll Roots in 2001 because in late 2000 to early 2001, 94.7 became an 80s station. For a little while, back in 2001, they played all 80s songs. And then they became 94.7 The Zone. 94.7 The Zone played alternative rock. And then it became the True Oldies channel. And now it's 94.7 WLSFM. And when it was the True Oldies channel, though, they did play, it was known as WLSFM now, and it's mostly a classic hit station. They play songs from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and the first Rock and Roll Roots album on The Drive was in 2002, and between 2002 through 2010, 9 more Rock and Roll Roots albums came out, volumes 4 through 12, and these albums were sold at Borders. And Borders is sadly no longer in business. And there was supposed to be a Volume 13. It would have been released in 2011, but because Borders went out of business that year, it went out of business in late 2010, early 2011. So because of that, there was no Rock and Roll Roots Volume 13, I should say. There was no Rock and Roll Roots Volume 13 in 2011. So it wasn't released that year because Borders went out of business and they couldn't find a store to sell them at, and that was it. Since then, there has not been a single Rock and Roll Roots album, and it's sad because they were really good. I looked forward to those albums every single year. I really did. It was nice to hear a bunch of rare songs and hard to find songs too, and all of the Rock and Roll Roots albums contained at least 2 songs from Chicago area artists from the 60s, 70s, and sometimes the early 80s as well. And these artists included the Ides of March, the Buckinghams, the New Colony Six, and the Crying Shames, among others. And back in 2012, I made a few albums of my own. I made a few Rock and Roll Roots albums of my own in 2012. I made volumes 13 through 26. I made 14. And I tried to make them as close to Stroud's as possible. All of my albums contained at least 2 songs from Chicago area artists like his. And I had a good mix of songs from the 60s, 70s, and early 80s as well. And over the last few weeks, I've made 16 more Rock and Roll Roots albums. So this would be volumes 27 through 42. And over the next 8 months, I'll present the track list for 2 albums each month. So between now, January, through August, I'll present the track list for 2 albums each month. And this month, I'm doing volumes 27 and 28. Now, all of my Rock and Roll Roots albums have they have at least 2 songs. Every album has 2 songs from Chicago area artists. Among these artists are the Ides of March, the Crying Shames, the New Colony Six, and the Buckinghams, among others. And all the albums have at least 1 song from the 80s as well. And like Stroud's albums, there are 12 tracks on every album, with one exception. Volume 11 from Stroud had a bonus track on it. It was an acoustic version of the New Colony 6 song, Can't You See Me Cry. It was a hidden track on the album. And my final album from before, back in 2012, Volume 26, the bonus track on that was Gold by Jon Stewart. And the bonus track in this series is on Volume 42, and I won't say what it is yet, so in August I will, though, because that's when I'll present Volumes 41 and 42. That's when I'll announce the track list for those albums. And anyway, now I'd like to present Volumes 27 and 28. Okay, track number 1 on Volume 27 is Louie Louie by the Kingsmen. And that's a garage rock classic. It's one of the best garage rock songs of all time. And it's probably the most famous song of all time, with lyrics that are hard to decipher. That song's been in so many TV shows and movies. I mean, my God. Track number 2 is War by Edwin Starr, and that's a Motown classic. And that song's been in a ton of TV shows and movies as well. Oh, going back, Louie Louie's from 1963, and War by Edwin Starr is from 1970. And that song was actually, believe it or not, it was originally done by The Temptations. But they chose not to release it as a single because it was too controversial. Motown wanted a lesser-known artist to do the song, so Edwin Starr did it instead, and it was a huge hit. And that's one of his 2 big hits. The other one from the year before, back in 1969, he had 25 Miles. And that song's on one of my Rock and Roll Roots albums as well. It'll be on one of my later ones coming up in the coming months. Track number 3 is Doo Wah Diddy Diddy by Manfred Mann, and that song's from 1964. And that's a classic British invasion song. And that song's been in a lot of TV shows and movies as well. And they didn't do it originally. It was originally by a girl group from the 50s, I want to say. 50s, early 60s. I forgot the name of the group, but Manfred Mann didn't do it originally. The 4th song is Free Ride by the Edgar Winter Group, and that song's from 1972. And that song's been in a lot of TV shows and movies as well. And it's one of that group's 2 really famous songs. The other was Frankenstein. It's one of the best instrumentals of all time. And that song's on one of my later Rock and Roll Roots albums as well. And both songs are from their album They Only Come Out at Night. The 5th track is Fresh as a Daisy by Emmett Rhodes. And he sounds like a cross between Paul McCartney and Gilbert O'Sullivan. And this song's from 1970, and this is the first of 2 songs from a Chicago area artist on this album. He's not from Chicago, but he's from downstate. I want to say Peoria. It's Illinois. It's not really Chicago, but I still counted him as a local artist, you know. It's a good song, it really is. It should have been a bigger hit. It just missed the top 40. The 6th song is Slipping Away by Dave Edmunds. And this song's from 1983. And I would say it's the second most famous song behind I Hear You Knockin'. I Hear You Knockin' was on one of my earlier albums, actually. And another one of his songs, Girls Talk, which is probably, I would say, his 3rd most famous song behind I Hear You Knockin' and Slippin' Away. That's on one of my later albums as well. Slipping Away was actually produced by Jeff Lynne. It was written and produced by Jeff Lynne of ELO, or the Electric Light Orchestra. And that explains why it sounds like an ELO song. I mean, it makes sense. Slipping Away is from 1983, and then track number 7 is Rock and Roll Chicago by M&R Rush. It's from 1980. They're another local group, so this is the second of two songs from a Chicago area artist on this album. M&R Rush, this song is from 1980. It's a good song, it really is. It should be a lot more well-known than it is. And then the 8th song is Get Ready by Rare Earth. This is from 1969. And this is the first of their 5 big hits. The others were I Know I'm Losing You, I Just Want to Celebrate, Born to Wander, and Hey Big Brother. And all those 4 other songs are on later albums that I have as well. And Rare Earth was one of the first. They were one of the first artists. They were one of the first white artists signed to Motown. It's true, they were. They were not the first. They were one of the first. They were a really good band. They were very underrated. They should be a lot more well known than they are. And Get Ready was, of course, originally done by The Temptations. I think Rare Earth did it better, though. Honestly, I like the Temptations version, but I think Rare Earth did it better. And this version of Get Ready is a single edit because the full length version is just too long for this album. The full length album length version of Get Ready is 21.5 minutes long. This is the single edit that's 2 minutes and 48 seconds long. And the ninth song is Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult. And this song's from 1976. And this song has been in a lot of TV shows and movies as well. Most famously, that classic SNL sketch with Christopher Walken. You know, I gotta have more cowbell. That's a great sketch. It's one of the best sketches they ever had. And this song's been in so many TV shows and movies, my God. They should have been a lot bigger than they were, Blue Oyster Cult, honestly. This is one of their two big hits. The other was Burnin' For You, and Burnin' For You is on one of my later albums, actually. And, okay, the 10th song is Darkness, Darkness by the Youngbloods, and this song's from 1969. And this is probably their second most famous song behind Get Together. And Get Together was on one of my earlier Rock and Roll Roots albums, and Darkness, Darkness is really good. They should have been a lot bigger than they were. They were a good band. They really were. And this song is from 1969. The 11th song is Shanty by Jonathan Edwards. And this is probably his second most famous song as well. The only one more famous than this is Sunshine. Sunshine was on one of my earlier Rock and Roll Roots albums, and Shanty is on this one. It's a good song. It's from 1971. It's from the same album as Sunshine. It's from his debut. I want to say it's his debut. It's called Jonathan Edwards. It's a self-titled debut then. And last but not least, the 12th and final track is Time Won't Let Me by The Outsiders. And this song's from 1966. And this is a garage rock classic. Absolutely. This is one of the first classic rock songs to contain horns, I think. This song came out in 66, so this is 2 years before Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and 3 years before Chicago, so it was groundbreaking, it really was. The Buckinghams had horns too, but they didn't really get going until until 66, 67, so around the same time. It was a big hit, though. Time Won't Let Me was a huge hit. It came out in 1966. Okay, and that was Volume 27. Volume 28, here it is. Track number 1 is I Just Want to Celebrate by Rare Earth. And this song's from 1971, and this might be their most famous song. The only one that's about as famous is probably Get Ready. And this song has been in so many TV shows and movies too, my God. It's a classic song. It's one of the most upbeat songs of all time, I think. It's a good party song, too. Absolutely. It's fun, it's happy. It makes you feel good, it really does. And the second song is Wooden Ships by the Ides of March. This is their cover of the classic Crosby... This is their cover of the classic Crosby, Stills, and Nash song, and the song was also done by Jefferson Airplane. Wooden Ships was actually written by David Crosby, Stephen Stills, and Paul Kantner of Jefferson Airplane. Both versions are really good, but this version's solid as well. In this version by the Ides of March, it's a medley, actually. They cover Wooden Ships and Dharma for One. Dharma for One is an instrumental from Jethro Tull from their debut album, This Was. That song's from 1968. It's a combination of Wooden Ships and Dharma for One. And this song is just over 7 minutes long. It's 7 minutes and 14 seconds to be exact. And this is the first of 2 songs from a Chicago area artist on this album. And it's a really good cover. Their version of Wooden Ships is really good. It has a progressive rock feel. It really does. And it also contains their famous horn set. It also contains the horns like at that point, the Ides of March had horns in their songs like Vehicle, you know. This is from the Vehicle album, so it's from 1970, and I Just Want to Celebrate it's from 1971. The third song is "I Fought the Law" by the Bobby Fuller Four. It's from 1966. And this is a garage rock classic as well. And believe it or not, the song was originally done by the Crickets. Not Buddy Holly and the Crickets, but the Crickets after Buddy Holly died. Their version was originally, their version's from 1961, so 5 years before this. It's a classic song, it really is. It's been in a lot of TV shows and movies, and it was famously covered years later by The Clash, and their version's good, but I think the definitive version's by the Bobby Fuller Four. The fourth song is "You Are the Woman" by Firefall. It's from 1976. That's the first of their three big hits. The others were "Just Remember I Love You" and "Strange Way." And those two are on later rock and roll roots albums of mine, and "You Are the Woman" is a beautiful song. I've always liked this song. It's really good. It's a soft rock classic. The fifth song is "The Letter" by the Box Tops, and it's from 1967. And this is their best and most famous song. It's a classic, it really is. It's been in a lot of TV shows and movies. And it was famously covered by Joe Cocker and also by a group called the Arbors. The Arbors version was on an earlier rock and roll roots album, a Stroud album, Volume 10, I believe, and their version's good. And I like Joe Cocker's too, but I think the definitive one's by the Box Tops. And this is the first of four songs. This is the first of their four hits that they have that are on my rock and roll roots albums. Their three other big hits, "Cry Like a Baby," "Soul Deep," and "Neon Rainbow," are on later rock and roll roots albums of mine. And "The Letter" is one of the shortest songs of all time to be a #1 hit. It's only 1 minute and 55 seconds long. It's one of the rare #1 songs to be less than 2 minutes long. #1 is "Stay" by Maurice Williams and the Zodiacs. That's the shortest song of all time that was actually a #1 hit. It's only like 1 minute and 40 seconds long, roughly. 1 minute 40, 1 minute 43. It's really short. And Jackson Browne covered that years later on his "Running on Empty" album. Well, the Loadout and "Stay" it was part of a medley with the Loadout. And the sixth song is "Sylvia" by Focus. And they're from the Netherlands. And their most famous song is "Hocus Pocus." Hocus Pocus was actually on one of my earlier albums. It's a classic song. Hocus Pocus is a classic. It's one of the weirdest songs of all time because of all the yodeling, but it's a great song. It has a great riff. And Sylvia's from 1972, and that's also an instrumental. But Sylvia's an instrumental as well, but it's a good song. It really is. It has a really good riff as well. It should be more well known than it is. It's their second most famous song behind Hocus Pocus. The seventh song is "Burnin' For You" by Blue Oyster Cult, and that's their second most famous song behind "Don't Fear the Reaper." And "Burnin' For You" is from 1981. And and Blue Oyster Cult really should have been a lot bigger than they were. The eighth song is "Wild Thing" by the Trogs, and this song is from 1966. And this song should be, this is one of the best garage rock songs of all time. Absolutely. It's been in so many TV shows and movies. I mean, the Jimi Hendrix Experience does a great cover of this. Yeah, Hendrix's cover of "Wild Thing" is really good. But I think the Trogs version's better. And this is their most famous song. They had three other pretty famous songs too. "Love Is All Around," "With a Girl Like You," and "I Can't Control Myself." And those songs are on later rock and roll roots albums of mine. And "Wild Thing's" the first of their songs on that's featured on one of my albums. And this song's from 1966. Track number 9 is "Girls Talk" by Dave Edmunds, and this song's from 1979. This is probably his third most famous song behind "I Hear You Knockin'" and "Slippin' Away." "I Hear You Knockin'" was on one of my earlier rock and roll roots albums, and "Slippin' Away" was on volume 27. And "Girls Talk" is from 1979. And then the 10th song is "Give a Damn" by Spanky and Our Gang, and this song's from 1968. And they're a local group. They're a Chicago area group, and I would say they're the closest Midwestern equivalent to the Mamas and the Papas. They sound a lot like the Mamas and the Papas. The Mamas and the Papas were from California, and the Spanky and Our Gang was from the Chicago area, and Three of their bigger hits were on earlier rock and roll roots albums of mine. Sunday Will Never Be the Same, Lazy Day, and Like to Get to Know You. And Give a Damn is a good song. It's a protest song, really. It's one of the best lesser-known protest songs, I think. It's from 1968. And this is one of the two songs from a Chicago area artist on this album. The other is Wooden Ships by the Ides of March. Track number 11 is Traces by the Classics 4, and this song's from 1969. And this is one of the most beautiful songs of all time. And it's also one of the saddest, too. It's a really good song. Spooky, their most famous song, was on a Stroud album, Volume 9, I believe. And Stormy's on one of my albums. It's on one of my earlier albums, and Traces is on this one. And their fourth most famous song, Every Day With You Girl, is on one of my later albums. But Traces is a beautiful song, it really is. And last but not least, track number 12, Traces is from 1969, and last but not least is Frankenstein by the Edgar Winter Group, and this is from 1972. It's from the same album as Free Ride. They Only Come Out at Night is the album. And Frankenstein's one of the best instrumentals of all time. It has a great riff, and it's been in a lot of TV shows and movies, and it's a really good song. Absolutely. And anyway, that was the track list for volumes 27 and 28 of my Rock and Roll Roots albums. And anyway, I apologize for the length of this video. I had a lot of songs to present, so whatever. And anyway, I'll be back next month with 2 new videos. And until then, take care.